What's going on YouTube? I'm Evan and you're watching Cloud9 Aquariums. Today I want to start a three-part series which actually does a deep dive into the tank tour of my 80-gallon Remodel Reef aquarium. The reason why this is going to be a three-part series is I want to make sure I'm able to go into all the nitty-gritty details, but also not bring you a giant 40-minute video. So for part one, let's just talk about the background story of this tank and the Aquascape. So I had the majority of this rock and the sand in this same tank as a mixed reef for about 5 years before I ended up doing a remodel, we're going to call it. And long story short, the reason why I did a remodel from a mixed reef to what we have now is because I really wanted to turn it into an SPS dominated tank. And the tank that I had going before this was just getting overgrown by green star polyps and rose bubble tip anemones, etc. So I kind of wanted to reset some of it, but still maintain that biology that I worked so hard to actually stabilize in this tank. So the way that I actually did a reset was I took out the rocks that had the bubble tip anemones on them and the green star polyp, which was basically what was on top of all this rock work, and the base rock actually stayed. So the sand and the base rock stayed in here. I removed most of the top portions of rock, and then I actually went through and did a full vac on the sand bed to get everything all nice and sparkly clean, and basically almost did a 100% water change on it. In addition to that, I took some brand new dry rock, it was all Marco rock, and I actually staged it on the second portion. So basically from about here down was all established live rock, from here up was all dry rock. It's crazy to look back and think that this rock was actually all dry rock about 7 months ago, because everything now all just looks exactly the same. It's got its color, it's got coralline algae growing on it, it's got tube worms, all sorts of just life and diversity in it. So that's the great thing, is I was able to really just seed that rock instantly with what I already had established in the tank, which was great. So I didn't really go through a full cycle, but I did go through a little bit of an ugly phase on the top portion of that rock. For those of you who don't know what that is, basically what happens is with a dry rock, when you put it in a tank, it tends to kind of go through a couple different phases that are really ugly, where it actually gets like different types of algae and diatoms and bacterial blooms on the surface of it as that surface is starting to populate with different bacterias. And so as it goes through all those different cycles, it just looks kind of ugly. But eventually, once you make it through all that nonsense, you get what we have now, which has coralline on it, and little tube worms, and all sorts of little just life and growth all over it. In terms of aquascaping, I decided to go with something that has a lot of openings in it. And from the front perspective, you may not be able to see it, but there's actually tons of little caves going in and out throughout the tank. The reason I did that is for a lot of swimming space. I wanted to make sure that the fish are able to kind of go in and out as they please, find plenty of little caves to hide in, and just kind of minimize aggression. But I also made sure, instead of stacking all the rock on the back wall like some people like to do, I wanted to make sure that there was a ton of flow in this tank, because I knew it was going to be an SPS dominated tank. So the majority of my rock work is all actually centralized in the tank. So what that main wall that you're looking at is actually in the center of the tank. So there's actually a ton of swimming space in front and along all the sides as well too. So you'll notice that fish are able to kind of just circulate throughout, and the water is also able to circulate throughout. In terms of tunneling, we've got some main passageways. There's one here, and then all these are actually interconnected too. So there's one that goes this way, one that goes in there, this one's a little one there. So I made sure to keep everything wide open, and it really allows the fish to just kind of go where they please. Another reason why I'm a big fan of this Aquascape, and it's actually something that I use in my freshwater tanks as well when I'm trying to scape them, is I like to be able to stand in front of the tank but not see everything at once. I like to have to actually spend time with the tank and look at it for a while. You know, especially when you have new people over and they're seeing a tank for the first time, there's that wow factor where they look at it and then they stand there, and then all of a sudden something new pops up, and then something new pops up, and then they start walking around the tank and realize that there's all this other life on the other side of the tank that they don't see just from that front perspective. And for me, that's something that really brings interest into the hobby, into the tank specifically. And so if you're able to kind of set things up in that direction, it just really allows for just so much more diversity in the tank itself. So as a quick review of the history of this tank, basically the rock was established about 5 years ago, but 7 months ago I decided to rip half of it apart, throw some new stuff in there, and let that seed off of the original rock. And that's the basic synopsis of the history of this tank. So for my next video, I'm going to get into the equipment that keeps this tank running. And if equipment just isn't your thing, then the final video of this series is going to be all about the fish and coral. So make sure you stay tuned for that.